Sri Lanka is one united nation again and fast on its path to a new future. A future for which a generation of Sri Lankans have paid for dearly, some with the ultimate sacrifice. The Sri Lanka Rupawahini Corporation, being the premier television network in Sri Lanka, considered it our duty to be actively involved in the formulation of that future. Thus, we bring you Checkmate, the stories of some extraordinary people who have gone that extra mile, set out that extra hour to achieve success in very ordinary circumstances, so that you too may be encouraged to aspire for such greatness. Checkmate, a new Sri Lanka, together we can.
Checkmate. It's about life as you see it.
Hello and welcome to another program of Checkmate. It's always nice to be in your halls at this time of the evening, courtesy of Sri Lanka Rupawahini Corporation Checkmate. Before we get on to tonight's program and our guest, I must convey a very special thank you to all of you, particularly on behalf of the entire production team who've been telling me that our viewership has been climbing. And the comments, the wonderful comments that we've been receiving from you both here and overseas on our Facebook page, as indeed on email. It's very encouraging. We take a very humble pride in your comments that you've been sending us, and we thank you for them, and that only encourages us to serve you better. I have some very special news for you, which I will not divulge right now, because suspense always is nice at the beginning of a program, but as we go on, I'm sure all of you will be very, very happy with the very special Checkmate news flash that we have for you. Now, as you know, a major part, if not the only part, of the success of Checkmate in the expanding horizons that Checkmate seems to be capturing day by day is very much to do with the selection of our guests. The production team takes meticulous care in selecting that creme de la creme of Sri Lankans, those that have really gone that extra mile to make something very, very special out of their lives and their careers, who we can use, which is the Checkmate ethos, for the future generations. Sri Lanka that is gearing up, Sri Lanka that needs to get to the pristine glory that it can get to, that younger Sri Lankans can use as examples. And our tonight's guest is once again a personification of that Checkmate ethos. Now, academically speaking, he has a BA Honours and an MA from Cambridge. He later on went to MIT, that's the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, where he did his electrical engineering degrees. Then he has also a PhD from McGill, and concurrently, he is one of these people who are perhaps both right and left brain. He concurrently did a MA in development economics from Concordia. And we had several other honorary doctorates and honoris causas, that the list goes on. Now his CV is extensive, and therefore I am not going to use this profile time to go through his entire CV, but as we discuss and get into various areas of his expertise, we are going to be discussing his involvements in those areas. He's authored several books, over 90 books. I'm afraid we only had time to go through some of them tonight. And for that very reason, Checkmate will go on, as you know, sometimes you do, to two programs and not just one. So we will record one, and we will go on to another program of Checkmate the following week, which will be a follow-up of today's program. He's written on a number of areas which we'll be discussing. He's had a lot of awards and recognitions. The Anita Garibaldi Gold Medal for meritorious services from the Brazilian government. He is Order of a Fellowship and Honoris Causa from the University of Bangladesh. the Outstanding Lifetime Achievements Award from 16 major professional bodies in Sri Lanka, and it goes on and on. But I saved the best for the last. Checkmate viewers, I am sure it's another first for Checkmate, as indeed for Sri Lanka and television here. He is the only Sri Lankan Nobel laureate who was presented a Nobel Prize in 2007 when he was a vice chairman of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC, where he shared this 2007 Nobel Prize with former Vice President Al Gore of the United States. It is indeed a privilege, our honor, to respectfully welcome Sri Lanka's own Professor Mohan Munasinghe. Ayubowan, Professor, welcome to Checkmate.
Ayubowan, it's a great pleasure and privilege to be on your program, Chrismal, and also to be talking to your erudite audience.
Thank you.
I look forward to it.
Thank you. Well, we got a long discussion ahead of us, as you know. 2 programs and not just one, but can we just start by where all stories start, your advent. I know that you were at pains when we had our initial chats to make a point to the youth, present youth particularly, that you don't necessarily have to be born with a silver spoon in your mouth to go on and achieve something out of your lives. You like to consider yourself from average middle class surroundings. Your father was a public servant. You want to talk a little bit about your family?
Yes, absolutely. I came from the middle class background. Of course, it was an English-speaking background, but we were not rich. But my father had a fairly senior position, of course, in the public service. He was director of the Public Works Department. And my mother, of course, although she was not qualified in degrees, was very accomplished in her own way. She was a talented musician, and in fact, she taught me to read, taught me mathematics and many other things. I had 3 sisters, older sisters, so I must say that
there's a feminine influence in that.
Absolutely, and I'm very comfortable, and I have an enormous respect for women because of that. So it's a very normal background.
And then once again, you were a loyal royalist. And the records show that you not just were not good only in your sciences, which you picked up later on in your life, but both in the arts and science streams. In fact, you won the highest number of panel prizes at Royal College. You want to talk a little bit about, and you were also a sportsman. You represented the country at tennis at the Davis Cup. So you want to talk a little bit about your school career at Royal?
Yes, I mean, I think one shouldn't brag about these things, but since you mentioned
we're proud of you.
Thank you. Since you mentioned it, I did reasonably well in Royal. And in fact, I got a direct entry to the engineering faculty without, at that time, going through the GSQE. But what I look back with great pleasure is the fact that school at that time allowed one to do many things. And you mentioned the word all-rounder. I played tennis, public schools, colors, Junior Davis Cup. I was head of the debating society, chairman of the English Literary Association, editor of the magazine.
Did you enjoy your time at Royal as a student?
Absolutely. So it's that all-rounded performance that really has contributed a lot, I would say, to my success in later years.
Talking of tennis, you met your wife, present wife, also on the tennis court somewhere in the process of playing tennis, didn't you? And you have now a family of your own. You want to talk a little bit about your immediate family now? 2 children who are also doing quite well.
Yes, I must say, I'm more comfortable talking about my wife's accomplishments. She is in fact a national champion of Sri Lanka in tennis for many years. So she's a better player technically than I am, but we still enjoy playing, and we play 4 or 5 times a week, which is very good, I suppose, for the health and so on, but we enjoy the game. My 2 children have both done PhDs. I suppose they are, to some extent,
Carried on
a little bit.
And the son has picked up from physics as well, hasn't he?
Yes, my son has done his work in physics and mathematics. My daughter did it in genetics and microbiology.
Before we get into the nitty-gritties of there's a lot to discuss with you, but how does it feel? I know you're someone that one of our recent guests wrote a book on Tread the Earth Lightly, and I've used this before with several of our guests. How does it feel to be now in Sri Lanka, the only Sri Lankan to be a Nobel laureate? I know that when we associate you, we talk to you, nothing of it is even manifest. But how does it feel for you to accomplish that and now be living here?
Well, personally, I try to keep a low profile in Sri Lanka, and this is very much an exception. And I think it's a tribute to your skills of persuasion that you winkled me out. But the reason for that is I'm a private person, and I value family life and so on. The other thing is, of course, that I travel a fair amount abroad and so on. Now, you asked me about winning or sharing a Nobel Prize. I think we came by it quite, in my view, it was a surprise. I mean, you asked the question, why me?
No, but we will get into the details of what the research that went into it later in our later segments. But I just want to know, what does Mohan Munasinghe feel, carrying that with me? I mean, you're the only Sri Lankan around. And anyway,
it's not a big burden, but as I said, there was an element of surprise. But now there is a certain amount of pressure. I have to tell you that, because in the first 2 years after the prize was awarded, my research output dropped almost to zero, because I was constantly being asked for interviews. People from US called at 3 o'clock in the morning because they don't know the time difference and want to have a quote. So because of that, there was a lot of pressure, but one learns how to handle it.
To cope with it.
To cope, and as I said, keeping a lower profile and valuing your own time and the family time is extremely important.
At 62, you went to do a bachelor's at Cambridge. Now, that was a time that had a lot of restrictions, regulations. In fact, we find a lot of people who've gone on to do master's degrees or postgraduate studies at Cambridge, Oxford. But bachelor studies, particularly in 1962, that would have been, was that only limited to the affluent people in Sri Lanka? Or how did you manage to do that with all those restrictions?
Well, you wouldn't remember because you were either not born or...
Not born, yeah.
But it was a time of austerity. It's very strict exchange controls. In fact, those who were allowed to leave the country were given an allowance of £3 and 10 shillings. That was all. Hardly enough to buy a couple of drinks on the plane. But the fact of the matter is, I sat for the Cambridge scholarship exam in Colombo. By special permission, they allowed the university in Colombo to do that. And I was successful. And then my father argued successfully that I should be allowed to go. And because of the scholarship and it was not a great burden on the national exchequer, yes. I was allowed to go, but I was the only one, except one other person, who went to Cambridge, Oxford.
Who was the other person?
The other person was the Prime Minister's daughter, Sunetra Bandaranaike, who went to Oxford at the same time.
Why the study of physics? Now, I know you mentioned that there's a mathematical explanation or equation to every phenomenon that you would find in this physical world. What made you pick physics? Why the study of physics?
Well, going very far back, I think in school, in Royal College, we had a master called Mr. Samuels, who was a very good physics teacher. It developed a sense of intuition of the physical world. But then after that, the link between physics and mathematics, I was very much a voracious reader, that how is it that numbers, which are abstract quantities of the mind, abstractions of the mind, how is it that those numbers very accurately represent through equations the functioning of the physical world. I mean, that was a great mystery, and therefore it ensnared me, at least for the early part of my academic life.
Pop quiz, Professor. So you think that there is a scientific or a mathematical explanation to everything in life?
No, I don't believe so.
So yeah, I just want to ask you, because it's interesting, with your the expertise in physics and science and your belief in that there is a scientific explanation, where do you sit with your faith? I know it's a personal matter, but philosophically speaking, there was a previous guest who argued that philosophy is that part that which science has not explored and found out an answer for. The moment you find an answer for it, that becomes science, and the rest remains. So where do you sit then in your faith and your belief, as opposed to this extent that you've gone to in physics and the physical world? And
yeah, let me be precise. You asked me why I was attracted to physics, because there is a link between mathematics and the physical world. So that allows us to manipulate physical objects, and the wonderful technology that surrounds us is in fact an outcome of that. But there are other realms. The realm, for example, of spirituality, of emotions, of feelings, the consciousness, which eludes that kind of mathematical analysis. And we could talk about it a little bit more, but basically there is a branch of physics, quantum physics, which I studied towards the latter part of my academic life, which is very closely linked to some of our understanding of, certainly through Buddhism, of the self, the way the self interacts with the world, and the path to enlightenment and so on.
we're going to go to a quick break now, and we're going to enter this realm of the professor's expertise in his areas of interaction in physics, in science, in social economics, and development, and so on. And we're going to also come to Sri Lanka and how that has filtered on to Sri Lanka. So lots to talk, not one but two programs. Don't go away, we'll be back after a short break. Welcome back. We are with Professor Mohan Munasinghe, Sri Lanka's one and only Nobel laureate in the privileged company, and we are going to be discussing his areas of expertise and some of his interactions, as I said, not just on this program, but next week to come as well. Professor, when we were having a brief chat, I noticed that you placed some emphasis on the fact that in your days as an undergraduate, then as a postgraduate, you said you went to read for your degree. You read a discipline at Cambridge. What were you trying to distinguish there?
Well, they use that old-fashioned term read to indicate that it is not a question of cramming your subject and regurgitating the thing at the examination, and I think it is very true. We have, of course, had less material to study then, so one had the leisure to look at other things and to do other things. There was also in the Cambridge system, the college system, the chance to meet people from a wide range of other disciplines. So I think I learned as much or more in the classroom, in the engineering department, as I did outside in the evenings, chatting with colleagues from philosophy and languages and various other subjects. So that is a sense of reading, in the sense of acquiring knowledge without making a great deal of effort or forcing oneself to do it in an artificial way.
Yeah. Perhaps an answer to several present-day parents, the issues that they're facing with children coming out of a school and running to tuition class, trying to, like you said, cram in, and put in as much as they can, then without perhaps even shaking their head, going to an exam, writing everything that they know, is completely different to the objective of study as you describe it. But talking of those student days, you were an active student, 1970s at MIT. I think probably that's the time of Vietnam, lot of emotions, lot of student activism. And you've actually taken part in several political activity as a student. You want to talk us to a little bit about that?
Yes, well, I would say I started in Cambridge. I mean, if you remember, the mid-60s was the period of Beatles. We were the Beatles generation. There was also in 1968 student movements which brought down two powerful presidents, Lyndon Johnson in 1968 in the US, and Charles de Gaulle in 1968 by Danny the Red. And I was part of that. I remember taking a petition on behalf of the Cambridge University students. I was president of the student government, a petition to Harold Wilson all the way to Downing Street. I remember, of course, meeting people like Jack Straw, who was at that time in the National Union of Students. He was very left-wing, but subsequently when he became minister, was very watered down. And I met him at some function, and we reminisced a little bit. But
what was it like? You're a Sri Lankan. Or, yes, you may have been leading or taking a prominent part in a student protest in London. You're a Sri Lankan, and technically not even a citizen there. What made you, one, what made you do that? And two, how did you identify yourself as part of that?
Well, basically, I was elected by the students of Cambridge University as president of the Student Representative Council, which is the first time a foreigner was elected. And I must say it is a sense of fairness of the Britishers that they did it. But the issue at that time was that they had raised the fees of foreign students. So it was tailor-made for me to lead the charge, and we took 10,000 signatures and went to Downing Street. But that sense of student activism, which we must foster in the young today, which is not to feel helpless in the face of bad news and bad things happening, not to necessarily take to violence and that side, but to use the tools that are available in a democratic framework as much as possible, and to understand that in the past, great things have happened through those movements. And the Vietnam War effort in the US is very similar. I participated in some of the primaries.
Was it the New Hampshire primary?
Yes.
Yeah.
I worked for Eugene McCarthy, who is not Senator McCarthy, who was the right-wing man, but Eugene McCarthy, who contested President Lyndon Johnson and defeated him in a primary and forced him to withdraw. Just imagine today, if Obama withdraws without running again, that's equivalent.
Correct.
And Lyndon Johnson was forced to withdraw. And I was part of a little bit of that. There was a great man in MIT called Noam Chomsky. He's the foremost linguist in the world, and he's the conscience of America. He refused to pay his taxes to support the Vietnam War, and I remember they came to arrest him, and all the students barricaded themselves, and there was pandemonium, but it was done in a very constructive way. There was not this anger and violence and trying to destroy.
Actually, you preempted partially my next question that I was going to put to you. Having been part of, very much an integral part of the student resurgence, if you like, how do you look at the several Middle East or wherever else in the world, several student uprisings that we see now? How do you associate yourself with what's happening? Do you see differences or likenesses? What is more, differences or likenesses?
I would say likenesses and differences both. I mean, you have to look historically that after the activism of the 60s and 70s, you had a period of the 80s, the 90s, and into this millennium, where the young were actually lulled into yuppidom. The emphasis was on getting a job, earning quick money, and going up the ladder. And it is only recently that you have a resurgence with environmentalism and some of this Wall Street type of anti-Wall Street thinking and the Arab Spring. Now, the similarities and the differences, the similarities are the spirit is the same, that there is something wrong with the system as it is. Young people feel that their future is a bit bleak, and they are expressing their differences of view. The difference is that the social media and the tools, the internet and so on that they use now are very different from the methods we used in the old days. Yeah.
At McGill, was this, although you were a science student, was it this interaction with perhaps socio-political forces that maybe prompted you to do that concurrent degree in economics. What prompted you, whilst you were now pursuing a PhD in your physical sciences, you also do a concurrent social science degree in economics? Why social science?
Well, exactly. I mean, I said I was an all-rounder, and I always had the other side. In science, you have to go very deep and very narrowly, and I was doing particle physics, quantum physics, and there is no time for other things. But then there was a side, the social conscience. I always felt that you had to, as a privileged person in a sense, you had to do things for poor people. And one of my fears was that if you became a very good physicist and stayed in the laboratory, first, that you would never have the facilities to come back to Sri Lanka and contribute, and secondly, you would never have time to do anything for the social issues as well. So therefore, I was forced to look for opportunities, and doing a degree in economics and gradually switching to some of the social sciences was my way of doing it. But I finished my physics, I did my PhD, stayed the course, and then switched.
As I said to audience, the length and breadth of Professor Munasinghe's areas of interaction, I don't think even over 2 programs I can encapsulate, but I'm trying my best. So I'm going to fast track you now another 5 or 6 years. In 1975, around that time, you become the first Sri Lankan young professional to be invited to join the World Bank. You apply amongst 2,000-3,000 people, and then you're picked. And the World Bank, of all places, here is a scientist for all intents and purposes, and then you're asked to join the World Bank. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, the transition was actually quite smooth, but I must say that I've had luck in life. I mean, there are opportunities where you can switch, and every time I've made a switch, I have not fallen by the wayside.
Is it luck or hard work?
Well, maybe a little bit of intuition, but also luck. In life, you have to be lucky. Sometimes you can make a switch and it can be very disastrous. So I switched from physics, where I was very successful, by the way, to economics. I was hired by a firm in Montreal to do some computer programming because I didn't know enough about economics, but I knew about mathematics. And I ran models for macroeconomic policy. And then the World Bank recruited some of these young professionals, and I was among the 15 or 20 chosen from several thousand people. Now, I hesitated before I came to the World Bank because it was coming from Canada, where I was very comfortable, to Washington was a big move. And the World Bank is, of course, the cathedral of capitalism, so to speak. But I did come, and I didn't regret it because I stayed there for 28 years with some breaks.
Yeah, and can I now once again fast track you? Mohan Munasinghe, making development more sustainable. This is a Mind publication. We'll talk of your institute later on, but I was just interested in seeing your explanation, the summary of the basic principles and methods of sustainomics. We'll talk of sustainomics later, but making development more sustainable. You want to take us through first your concept. I want to bring you to the triangle that you very illustriously use to explain the phenomena. But